Hey everyone, we're going to start another Sunday school lesson on the book of Daniel. We're still not back into our Sunday school setting at church, and we have a desire to teach a Sunday school lesson and get it out to everyone. So the next book is the book of Daniel. I had my dear friend Sandra to give me gentle pushes. She wants us to hurry up and do this book, so here we're going to get started, all right? So there's a whole lot more to study than what I'm going to teach today in this book, but once we finish it, I think you'll have a greater understanding of what it's all about, and you dig deeper and you learn more, and you know, if we have any questions or you want to call me or talk about things, we can, for sure. But Daniel starts out with a war, and you know, when there's times of war, it's a bad thing. King Nebuchadnezzar invades Jerusalem, and you have to put yourself there and think about the horses and the blood and the murders and the screaming and the crying and the yelling and everything that's going on with this battle. And of course, King Nebuchadnezzar wins this battle that he has with Jerusalem. And King Nebuchadnezzar is from Babylon, and Babylon is a place that is just it's a very sin-filled place. They have religion, but they don't have a relationship with God. They have religion with little g gods, I call idols, and everything but our one true Holy Father, a little g God. And that's what Babylon was all about. It was full of worldly desires, and everyone wanted to be a part of Babylon. And that's what King Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom. So that's where he came from. And he had soothsayers and magicians and different ones that told his fortune and could tell him things. That's who he went to for advice, were those types of people. But as he's overtaking Jerusalem, he tells one of his head eunuchs to kidnap. And he was well known for doing that. So he wanted him to kidnap him some young men to serve in his kingdom. And he gave him specific details as to what kind of young men that he wanted. And he said he wanted young men with no blemish, who were very handsome, gifted in all wisdom, processing knowledge, and quick to understand. Now, the reason he wanted them to process knowledge and be quick to understand is because, like we've probably heard in our lifetime, some kidnappers brainwash you. And so what he's actually going to do is he's going to teach all these boys that he kidnaps, he's going to teach them his language, his way of life, the way he eats. He's going to castrate them. He's going to teach them to be just like he wants them to be in his kingdom. And so he was known to kidnap. And he was also known to take items. And right here at the beginning of the book of Daniel, it tells us that he did take some goblets. And it says, actually, let me read it. It says, and the Lord gave into his hand with some of the articles of the house of God, which he carried to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God. So he took things from Jerusalem out of the Lord's house and took them to his little g gods' homes. And these were goblets. We're not going to actually talk about them very much today. But he took that, and he was well known to kidnap. So he's taken these young men. It says specifically males. Young, good-looking men is who he desired to take. Now, the age of these young boys were somewhere between the ages of 14 and 16. So let's just say, for the sake of our study, that they're 15 yeyears old. And they were the cream of the crop, all right? They're very smart, very good looking. And you can imagine, just with this war happening, you know, if you were there and you watched the enemy take your child away. I mean, these boys weren't but around 15 years old, and he's taking them away. And, you know, as a parent, a grandparent, a sister, a brother, these people were probably traumatized that these young boys were leaving like that. I don't know, you know, they may have been bound or hurt, or who knows, but they were taken. And what a hard thing. They were outstanding young men in their community. They were well-rounded in life. And I'm sure their parents and their families were devastated that they were taken. I don't know how many were taken, but our lesson in the book of Daniel focuses on the 4, all right? Now, when the king gets them to his palace, he appoints them a daily portion of his type of food. He has delicacies. He has wine. Now, they're 15 years old. I don't know if they're drinking wine or if it's not even fermented. I have no idea. But that's the kind of food that he wants to feed them. Now, they can't serve him until they go through 3 years of training, which will put them to be 18 years old. And so the king, so, you know, they're their daily things were taken care of. They obviously had a place to sleep, and they were given good food. But Daniel said, I don't want to eat that kind of food. I want to eat water and fruits. And Daniel found favor among one of the eunuchs, the head eunuchs. And the head eunuch said, I have to feed you what the king told me to feed you. He said, or else I'm going to get killed. He said, I fear for my life if you don't eat like the king wants you to eat. And Daniel said, feed me the way I want to eat. Feed me the fruits and the vegetables and the water. And he says, I promise you everything will be all right. And the eunuch said, well, what if I bring you before the king when the 3 years are up and you look terrible? And Daniel says, I'm not. He said, I'm going to look good. I'm going to look better than all of those who ate, the king's food. So just to back up a minute, it was Daniel, Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael. These are the ones that we're going to focus on this study. And I wanted to bring out that their parents had also named them godly names. A lot of times, well, most of the time, if not always, when people name their children, there's a meaning behind that name. And Daniel meant God has judged, and Hananiah meant God had been gracious. Mishael meant who is what God is, and Azariah meant God has helped. So their names are very important. That was another thing that the king did, besides changing their food and the way they spoke, and he kidnapped them. Most of all, they were just taken away. And he changed their names. And for Daniel, it was Belteshazzar. For Hananiah, it was Shadrach. For Mishael, it was Meshach. And for Azariah, it was Abednego. And all of those names had a pagan god relationship to those names. So they were given a godly name, and their names also were changed to have a pagan meaning. So those poor guys just had to go through a whole lot. But he purposed in his heart that he wasn't going to eat the kind of food, and he had that conversation with the steward and the chief of the eunuchs, and they agreed. They said, he said, well, I'm going to let you do that, but I sure hope you look good. And it says in verse 15, their features appeared better and fatter in the flesh than all the young men who ate the king's delicacies. Fatter in flesh means healthiness. They looked really good. So that was a good thing that happened. And I thought it was pretty cool for Daniel to be only somewhere around 18 years old, and he purposed in his heart, maybe at that time he was still 15 when he said he would not eat like that. And he purposed in his heart to do that. So he was a very strong young man. And it says in verse 17, excuse me, it says, as for these 4 young men, God gave them knowledge and skill in all literature and wisdom. And Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. So who prepared them for this? God did. This book is all about God. Every book in the Bible is. But it's about God giving these boys what they needed to get through this. And the extra thing that Daniel had was that he understood visions and he understood dreams. So it says that they were 10 times better than all the astrologers and all the ones that King Nebuchadnezzar went to for advice. That Daniel, Hananiah, Azariah, Mishael were better, 10 times better than all of those. And the last verse is a timeline of Daniel's lifespan, because it tells us who was the king there. At that time, it was King Cyrus. And so we realize that Daniel's going to be about 90 years old as he stays in this kingdom. So he never gets to go back home. We'll talk about that a little bit later too. But as we move on to chapter 2, King Nebuchadnezzar can't sleep. So all we've learned so far is that there was a war. King Nebuchadnezzar's from Babylon. He goes into Jerusalem. He kidnaps these young boys. Daniel stands up for himself. He's not going to eat the way the king wants him to eat. And they've totally been transformed into other people. Or at least King Nebuchadnezzar is going to try to. And so in chapter 2, King Nebuchadnezzar has a dream. And the problem is he wakes up and he knows he's had a dream, but he can't remember what the dream is. And that's happened to me before, and I'm sure it's probably happened to you. You can remember little pieces of it, and you know that you've dreamt something, but you can't figure it out. So he gives a command to his astrologers and his sorcerers and all the people that are real important to him. And he says, come here. And they all come and they stand before him. And he says, I have had a dream, and my spirit is anxious to know the dream. He's all upset. And the Chaldeans spoke to the king in Aramaic, saying, O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will give you the interpretation. Well, he doesn't know the dream, so he's telling them to tell him the dream. I mean, after all, they're soothsayers and astrologers and all that. They should know, just like these people today that say they can tell your fortune or do all the things that they say they can do for people today. I mean, if they could, they'd be winning the lottery every Saturday night. They'd be giving everybody the numbers. There is a demonic force out there. The Bible teaches us that. But but these guys are false. They're not real. And so they're telling the king, you tell us what you dreamt and we'll give you an interpretation. Well, of course they were just going to make up something. And he's saying, no, I want you to tell me the dream. And I want you to look. I don't usually veer off into other books, but here in Leviticus it says, give no regard to mediums and familiar spirits. Do not seek after them to be defiled by them. I am the Lord your God. The Lord is saying that to us. That's a command for us to stay away from these kind of things. Soothsayers, mediums, familiar spirits. He says, don't seek after them. I'm the Lord your God. You know, these shows about this kind of stuff, I've heard Christian people say, oh, I can't wait for the show about this medium to come on so I can watch it. And, you know, I'm not saying that in a judgmental way, but, you know, we're not supposed to participate in that stuff. So this is where this king came from. And so the king answers and he tells his people, he says, my decision is firm. If you don't tell me what my dream is and the interpretation, he said, I'm going to cut you in pieces. So he has a bad temper, I guess. He's going to chop them up. And he says that your houses will be made into ash heaps. So he's going to burn their houses up. If he chops them up, he's going to not have a place for their families to live either. And he says, you need to tell me, or that's what I'm going to do. He said, if you do tell me, he said, I'm going to give you gifts and rewards. And he said, you're going to be in good shape if you tell me what I want to know. So the Chaldeans answered the king and they said, there's not a man on earth who can tell you what you dreamt. You have to tell us what you dreamt, and then we'll tell you what it means. And the king says, okay, you're going to die. So for this very reason, it says in verse 12, the king was angry and very furious. He was angry and very furious. Two of those things. That's a lot. And he gave a command to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. To him, those were the wise men, the astrologers, the Medians, and the soothsayers, and the Chaldeans. They were the wise men of Babylon. So a decree went out. A decree is like a letter, and it's an announcement, and it goes out, and it can't be broken. Usually the kings would stick their ring in wax and seal the decrees, and they could not be broken. They could not be revoked. So he sends a decree out, and they begin killing all the wise men. They started killing them. And they sought Daniel and his companions to kill them because they were considered wise men as well. So they were going to be killed too. So these poor guys didn't know what to do, so they go and they find Daniel and his men to kill them. And they were included because they were under this decree. So Daniel approaches one of the captains that had come to kill him, and he says, you know, what's going on? And the guy did take the time to tell him what was going on. And he says, you know, give me time so that I could tell the interpretation of the dream. He says, give me time. He said, what's the rush? Well, why are we rushing to kill? You know, we don't have to hurry. Give me some time. So it says Daniel went to his house, and he made the decision known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions, that they might seek the mercies of God of heaven. All of them are going to pray to God. Not just Daniel, all of them went in together and they pray concerning this secret. And Daniel and his companions might not perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. They wanted God to tell them what to do. And then it says in verse 19, then the secret was revealed to Daniel in a night vision. Remember, Daniel had that gift that God had given him. And then the next thing says, so Daniel blessed the God of heaven. And Daniel answered and said, blessed be the name of God forever and ever. I find that very, very touching. Daniel asks, he asks with his buddies, and he gets an answer. And then as soon as he gets an answer, Daniel answers the Lord by praising him and thanking him. He didn't miss a beat of giving the Lord thanks and honor and praise. He went right through it. You can read the rest of that. He says, I praise you, O God of my fathers. You have given me wisdom and might. You have made known to me what I need to know. And he goes on immediately. And Daniel answered. I love that. Those three words. And so Daniel goes to the king. And Arioch, that's the captain, quickly brought Daniel before the king. And the king said to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar to the king, Are you able to make known to me the dream which I have seen and the interpretation? And Daniel answered, and he says, well, the secret which the king demanded, the wise men, the astrologers, the magicians, the soothsayers cannot declare to the king. He said, but there is a God in heaven. So he gives God all the credit. He doesn't say, I can do it, because it's been revealed to him. He knows what it is. But he goes ahead and tells King Nebuchadnezzar, it's God. He said, there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days. Now, this is prophecy. This is a book of prophecy. So what he's saying is, this stuff isn't happening right now, your dream, but it's going to happen in latter days. And what's so interesting about this dream is it's talked about in chapter 7 of Daniel, and it's also talked about in the book of Revelation, talking about the latter days. The same dream is part of the book of Revelation, which is pretty cool. So it's showing the truth right here. Your dream and the visions of your head upon your bed were these. And he's fixing to tell him. But I love that. Your dreams and the visions of your head upon your bed were these. And so he goes on to explain that there is a God in heaven that can reveal this. And he says, it's kind of an odd dream, so just hang with me. He says, O king, you are watching, like he's dreaming, and behold a great image. He sees a great image. This great image, whose splendor was excellent, it was beautiful. It stood before you, and its form was awesome. The image's head was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, and legs and iron, and feet partly of iron and partly of clay. So it's a great image. I'm going to show you. I call it Metal Man. That is not in the Bible. That's just what Sherry calls this dude, okay? Don't worry about the countries over here on this actual image. But he sees this man who's got a head of gold, arms and chest of silver, body of bronze, iron legs, and clay and iron feet, okay? This is what he sees. He sees Metal Man. This is what the dream's all about, all right? He sees this image, and this is brought forth later in the book of Revelation, and in chapter 7 of Daniel, we'll learn a little bit more about this guy. It was large, it was beautiful, it was perfect. It had all these metals on it, all right? And he says, you watched while a stone was cut out without hands, which struck the image on its feet of iron and clay and broke it into pieces. Now, this rock, I put that on the image too. There's a rock right here. This rock breaks this image. Now, this image represents kingdoms. And so in the latter days, what's going to happen is this rock is going to destroy these kingdoms. That's all it's saying. This rock destroys it. It destroys the iron, the gold, the silver, the bronze. Have any of y'all cooked out of an iron skillet? I can't imagine my iron skillet even sitting out in the yard for 200 years and being ash. But this rock is going to destroy all these metals the way it's brought forth in this dream, all right? So it says that this rock was not cut out with human hands, and it strikes the image. So he says the interpretation of the dream, he says, you, king, are the King of Kings. For the God of heaven has given you king. So he's telling King Nebuchadnezzar, he's kind of stroking him, but he's telling him the truth. You, O king, are King of Kings. For the God of heaven has given you kingdom, power, and strength, and glory, and has made you ruler over them all, because you are the head of gold. So don't you know King Nebuchadnezzar is feeling pretty fine right now, because he sees this splendor object, and then he gets told by Daniel, who has the interpretation of this dream, that he is the head of gold. He is the top dude of this image that he sees. He's the head of gold. He said, but after you, he says, your empire is the best, but after you shall rise another one which is inferior to yours. That would be the silver. And then the next one would be inferior, the bronze, and then iron, and so forth and so on. So every kingdom after you is inferior to you. And then it says, and the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron. Think about an iron skillet. Inasmuch as iron breaks in pieces and shatters everything, and like iron that crushes, that kingdom will break into pieces and crush all the others. I'll explain all of that later. You don't have to worry about that right now. You are not lost. You're just hearing what King Nebuchadnezzar hears about his dream. All right? So he says, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. That's when he crushes, like I said, these are kingdoms. We'll explain it a little better later. but God's going to crush these kingdoms and make a kingdom that will never be destroyed, which is going to be God's kingdom. Now, who is this rock? I'm sure you guys have already figured it out, but in Deuteronomy 32:4, it says, He is the rock, capital R. Deuteronomy 32:31, for their rock is not like our rock, capital R. 2 Samuel 23:3, the rock of Israel spoke to me. 1 Corinthians, rock, for they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and the rock was Christ. So this rock is Christ, and he's going to destroy all these kingdoms. This is prophecy. God's going to get rid of all the nations and all the kingdoms. He's going to destroy them all, and he's going to build his own. And so this doesn't happen in the book of Daniel, but it tells us it's going to happen in the book of Revelation. So this is where we dig in here. God's going to set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed. No one will conquer it. This is his world. It's not our world. So King Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face before Daniel. And when they bowed, they went on all fours. I mean, they didn't just bow at the waist like a curtsy. They fell to the ground. And that's what the king did to Daniel, this young boy. He's probably 18. He falls down to him, and he wants to present an offering and incense to him. And he says to Daniel, truly your God is the God of gods and the Lord of kings and a revealer of secrets, since you could reveal this secret. So King Nebuchadnezzar was very impressed with Daniel's God. He was very impressed with him. So he got a raise, he got promoted, and so it says that Daniel petitioned the king, and he set Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael, over the affairs of the province of Babylon, but Daniel sat in the gate of the king. So what Daniel did was he was promoted, and he also wanted the king to promote his friends. He was looking out for his buddies. I think Daniel's a real good guy, and he's very young at this point, all right? So he gets a good job, and he runs into this good fortune because God allowed him to, and God showed him. And I think Daniel 2:23 is so cool. We're going to end here. And he says, I thank you and praise you, O God of my fathers. You have given me wisdom and might. You know, we should thank God for the wisdom that he gives us. And now made known to me what we asked of you. He's praising God, but he's including that his friends asked with him, that we asked of you, for you have made known to us the king's demand. He included his friends. He's a very nice young man. So he was promoted to sit at the gate of the king, and King Nebuchadnezzar is very happy, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are happy too. And that's where the story ends. So you haven't missed anything. You just went through a little war. You got to see some boys get kidnapped. Not that that was a good thing, but King Nebuchadnezzar's tried to change him into what he wanted him to be. Daniel's life was saved because God had given him discernment over dreams and visions, and all of this that we've read so far. And I want you to read it verse by verse, as I did not read it verse by verse for the sake of time. So I want you to do that and see how involved God is in this. God took care of every bit of this for Daniel. And we get to see that this prophecy comes to pass. And we're going to see it in chapter 7. We're going to learn more about Metal Man, as I call him. So don't let that confuse you and make you think that you can't continue with this study. But I'll see you next week.